I'm interested, Malaya, to know the reasons for the swap. Have you found this a better system, less expensive than Zoom, or what's the change for?
So it's still using Zoom, but it will allow us, for those who are attending virtually, it will give them a full measure of participation with an interaction with the people who are there in person in Nice.
Okay.
So if you're coming to Nice, obviously this will not be how you interact with everyone, but if you're a virtual participant and unable to travel, then we want to make sure that everyone who's there is able to speak with those who are not there, but still fully present, as interactive as you would if you were sitting next to each other.
Okay, thanks. No, it's just just fascinating. Sort of hopefully, because we're all zoomed in kind of thing. This seems quite intuitive, so.
Good. And also I want to direct your attention, so the Q&A function, um, the Q&A function in Whova is for asking questions. This morning, we're going to ask questions about both the financial statements that have been prepared, about past financials, and also about future budget decisions, the proposed and amended budgets. So if you are in Whova and you take a look on the right side of your screen, you'll see the Q&A, and that's a great place if you've got a question. We'll call on people to speak, but we would really appreciate it if you would type out your question. That way others can see it, and if someone else has the same question, they can add their vote to yours.
Malaya, I see a chat, but I don't see a Q&A.
Okay, real quick, let me share my screen and show you on the Whova page. So if you are in Whova, you should see us here, where we can join in Zoom or join in Whova. But then here on the side, you'll see Q&A, polls, chat, and community.
Is that because I've got a full screen?
That maybe if you'll
okay.
Leave
you
the
have to exit full screen. You have to exit.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that for those who are also stuck in full screen.
All right, we're at 10:03, and I want to respect the time that people have set aside for this meeting today. So why don't we begin? Thanks so much, Malia, for gathering us together and for putting together the architecture that we're going to be using for our convention this year. We've been talking a little bit about it as we begin our meeting, but as you all know by now, we're having a hybrid convention. We're trying to make it possible for people who are going to be physically present in Nice and people who are going to be joining us virtually from around Europe to feel like they're equal partners and equal participants in our meeting. And so we've chosen a platform called Whova, which is designed around exactly this problem. And one of the things we're going to be doing in this gathering today is trying out some pieces of this so that we understand it better, and those of you who are delegates get a little bit used to using it. In case you didn't receive it earlier, we sent it through Whova as a little temptation to get you to sign up for this platform. I've put in the chat a link to a PDF, which is the financial report that will be in the delegates packet. The whole delegates packet is coming to you soon. It may in fact be coming to you later today. And it's long, like it was last year. So I encourage you to spend some time considering it and reading it. There are resolutions that have been proposed by good and faithful people, a number of them from the Council of Advice, just to sort of make little changes around the edges of our canons that we need to make. But I promise there will not be, we will not hit the record number of resolutions that we had last year. So we will not be quite so resolution focused as we were in our all virtual meeting from last year. So with that, welcome to the town hall. And I'm very pleased to have with us our treasurer, our faithful exchequer, the man who keeps us honest with respect to the auditors, Denis Lemoulac. And Denis, I'm going to bring up my screen and share it, and I'm going to let you take it away. Denis, I think you're muted. There we go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to report on the past, which is the easy part. I say it's the easy part, not that 2020 was an easy year. You can imagine that the pandemic caused many problems to all of us, to the convocation, to your congregations, and we tried to face it and act to sort of soften the consequences for your congregations and for all the convocation. This year, 2020, I mean, was, from a financial point of view, not a bad year. For one main reason, that our budgets were significantly underspent. If there were no, or almost no in-person meetings, there were therefore no travel or very little, which meant that our expenses were way below budget. We also were able to benefit from major support from the Board of Foreign Parishes in 2020. They decided to help the convocation and its congregations with $250,000, half of which was an outright grant to the convocation, half of which was an interest-free loan over a period of 5 years. All these funds were again put at the disposal of our congregations, which probably helped some of you get through this difficult year. The council also decided almost immediately, early in the year, to cut the assessments by 5%. And this measure was carried forward to 2022. And I don't want to betray a secret in saying that it might be carried forward to 2022. We've also made some decisions, financial decisions in 2021. Well, one was made in 2020, I mean. One was the clarification of the ownership of the Rothon Fund. It appeared that the Rothon Fund was not really supposed to be on our balance sheet. It's a trust fund. It's been managed in trust by since the beginning by the Board of Foreign Parishes. But since our auditors noticed that we had income from financial assets, and the Rothon Fund was a major asset on our balance sheet, we might be exposed to taxation in France. So we looked carefully at our balance sheets and the two major investments we had at that time, which were the Rothon Fund and Trust Fund 1145, the DFMS, the General Trust Fund of DFMS, in which we had a significant holding. We looked at them carefully and we asked ourselves, do we really need to have those heavy financial assets on our balance sheet, or would we be pleased to be beneficiary of the income of those investments without having the trouble of being the owners and therefore being exposed to taxation. There were two different cases there. One was the Rothon Fund, which had been established very clearly to benefit the convocation and its mission for youth and other mission. And we had a discussion with the Board of Foreign Parishes, and it appeared that indeed the Board of Foreign Parishes could carry the Rothon Fund on their own balance sheet. They actually already had it on their balance sheet. So it couldn't be on two different balance sheets or two different entities. So it was rather a clarification to decide that we would not carry the Rothon Fund on our balance sheet anymore. We would just be what we always were, the beneficiary of the fund. The decision was made in 2020. At the end of 2020, the balance sheet, our balance sheet didn't carry the Rothon Fund anymore. Let's go now to the revenue. There I have little to say because everything that had been budgeted, apart from the assessments which were reduced by 5%, but they were almost in line with the budgets. Investment income was down 25,000 euros. We no longer took money from the Rothon Fund, which we did on a regular basis for many years at a very reasonable rate of 5,000 euros a year. And the Trust Fund 1145, the FMS Trust Fund, bore a little less or significantly less than the previous year. But all this income was not taken, not drawn, it was reinvested. So we didn't need that money. We didn't need that money for one great reason, is that we got an emergency grant from Board of Foreign Parishes, which helped us make this emergency package in the spring of 2020 to support the congregation. So we have an overall revenue. We had an overall revenue in 2020, which was close to 600,000 euros. Now to the expenses. Expenses were lower than budgeted, not significantly lower, because of the emergency measures we took. Our income and revenue was in 2020 35% above budget. Our expenses were 2% under budget, including the emergency measures. You can see, this on this slide, that the only budget that was overspent was the support of congregation, almost double what had been budgeted, more than double what had been budgeted. This was made possible because of the 100,000 direct grants that were made following the equivalent grant made to the convocation by the Board of Foreign Parishes. All other expenses, apart from the administration, of course, which accounts for well over 40% of our budget. But we have to pay our people, we have to pay our bills. And the support of clergy was below budget. Administrative costs were kept below budget, but at a significant level, which resulted into an operating result of 165,000 euros. which is good. Which is good because it helped us limit the consequences of the write-off of the Reform Fund. We don't have it here, but you will have it in the delegates package, the balance sheet, which is in our language, very specific language here, is called the financial position at the end of December 2020. 165,000 minus 211, which was the value of the write-off, the book value of the Reform Fund on balance sheet, enabled us to limit our loss. It's not an operational loss, but it's a lowering of the net value of the convocation by only 45,000 euros. So not a bad year all in all, and we expect 2021 to be along those lines. We should also anticipate a significant operating result at the end of the year. But we will have to bear the cost again of the transfer of Trust Fund 1145 along the same lines as Reform Fund, but for different reasons, to the Board of Foreign Parishes, which will be holding our major investments in trusts on our behalf. So we won't have those investments on our balance sheet, but we'll still get the revenue if needed. So this is for 2020 and a sort of artist's impression of 2021. Any questions?
You can use the question and answer feature on Whova if you like. And we can just come back for questions at the end of the presentation. Maybe what I can do, Denis, is continue. And I'll pick up now and talk a little bit about the budget that we're bringing to convention for approval for next year, for 2022. So one of the stranger things about convention for us is that we talk about the year before and the year to come, because we're living in the year that we're in. So we don't really have a final report to offer you about 2021. Obviously, it's October. You will see the actual spending in this year, current to August 31st, in the materials that are provided to you. But our conversations as a convention have two purposes. One is to give approval to the audited financial statement for the past year, 2020, and one is to approve the budget for 2022. So I say a little bit about this in the report that's been sent to you, but let me say a word about the budget process. Bishops have a lot of jobs. A lot of the jobs that sometimes people think bishops have, we don't really have, and a lot of jobs that people don't think we have, we do. And one of the jobs that I have as a bishop is to make sure there's an alignment between the resources that people entrust to us, whether it's payments of assessments or the money given by generous donors in the past that now makes up our endowments, the endowments that benefit us. My job is to make sure those resources are spent in a way that aligns with our ministry priorities as a convocation. So in March, I draw up a proposed budget for the year to come, and I submit that budget to the Finance Committee. And the Finance Committee meets with me sometime in the spring to go over sort of how I'm seeing the budget shaping up, what I see the priorities arising in our lives together, in our ministry together. And at the same time, they consider the grant requests that have been submitted by all of our congregations who have responded to the annual grant cycle of the convocation. And when we work together on that budget, we come to a conclusion about what the budget should be. And that gets submitted to the Council of Advice. And the Council of Advice gets its bite at the apple at its September meeting. So the document that's set before you at convention is a budget that's been through basically 3 steps: prepared by the bishop, reviewed by the finance committee, and then ultimately approved by the Council of Advice to be submitted to convention. And the last of the steps is for you to consider, to hear our thinking about it, and then we hope to approve the budget that we propose. So here are some general observations that went into my thinking about 22. First, the obvious thing: the pandemic is not over. We don't know what the future holds in terms of the coronavirus pandemic. We've already seen variants come upon us that have shaped our lives in ways we didn't expect. We have the good news about vaccines, but this is still very much a story that is not ended. And so we know there's some volatility ahead of us, and we need to kind of expect that. The 5% reduction in assessments that Council of Advice approved for all of our congregations within weeks of the first lockdowns, that was continued for this year, and it will be continued for next year as well, at least in the budget that's proposed to you. We think that's the right step for us to take, to recognize that these are difficult days for our parishes. But I also want to reiterate that we're incredibly thankful that the payment we've received on parish assessments and mission assessments has been very strong. We've met our expectations there, and for that, we're incredibly grateful. As Denis mentioned, in the current year, there are some changes to our balance sheet, which follow the pattern of what he discussed with the Rowthorn Fund, again, because we were taught by our auditors that we were risking exposure to taxation in France because of the way in which our endowed funds were held. It seemed wisest to us to make an outright gift of the trust fund 1145, the largest of the trust funds we held, to the Board of Foreign Parishes. And the reason here is very simple. We receive the same benefit from the resource in doing it this way without having the exposure to the possibility of taxation, because now the fund is held by a US entity which has a single philanthropic object, and that object is the convocation. So it just has seemed like this is the wisest thing for us to do. And at a special meeting of the Assemblée Générale back in June, this was approved. So that will be on the figures that you see when we report on 2021 next year. A few more observations about the year to come. Here's a challenge that we face. Our operations are resuming. We're beginning to meet again. We're beginning to travel again, but our income picture isn't yet clear. So that builds in some risk for us that we just need to understand and be prepared for. And we know we have a major expense ahead of us in 2022, which is the delayed General Convention, 80th General Convention of the Episcopal Church, which will be held in Baltimore in July of next year. That we've priced in at 30,000 euros, which is a shockingly large number to your bishop, but your bishop is told that that is probably a crazy optimistic number and that it probably should be a larger number. And so one of the things we may need to discuss when we get to convention is whether the number for the convention budget should be a little larger, and if so, how we pay for it. At the 2019 convention, we created a number of task forces, 4 in specific, one on climate and creation care, one on refugees and migrants, one on race, racism, and beloved community, and a special one on children and youth. One of those task forces obviously continues as the Youth Commission, which is established in our canons. The other 3 now continue as ministry initiatives. And I'm very convinced that if we're going to do something and have a focus in ministry about organizing our conversations around these issues, we need to provide some resources for them. And so you'll see in the budget that we've done exactly that. You'll also see that the single largest change in the proposed budget for 22 is a pretty significant increase in the budget for children and youth. And that has to do with the appointment of not one, but two people to share the role of coordinator for ministry with children and youth. And what this means for us is that wherever we can, we have to realize economies in the way that we do our work together as a convocation. When we can, we need to meet virtually. We've learned how to do it. We've learned how to make the most out of these tools. We don't have to travel every time we meet. We can find a new balance between meeting virtually and meeting in person. So let's get to the numbers. Here's the first Camembert chart of the year. This is what we expect to see in revenues for 2022. And I'll just start at 12 o'clock and go around clockwise. Assessments we expect to see at about 241,000 euros, or 45% of our picture. That's relatively unchanged as a percentage of our income from the current year. Investment income comes in at 200,000 euros, which is a little bit down on expectations. That is a conservative number, I'll just say. And as your bishop, I always feel like we should kind of lowball our expectations about income from market-based investments. Most of the management of our investments, for reasons that we've discussed, is performed by the Board of Foreign Parishes. They have an excellent track record of stewardship of these resources on our behalf, and this number will very likely come in higher than it appears here. It is also subject to exchange rate fluctuation because the board obviously works in dollars and we don't. So there's an exchange rate transition that happens before these hit our books. But by and large, we think this is a conservative number, and if anything, is likely to be larger. We now receive loan repayments from those parishes and missions that received part of the emergency loan program from us. And that income that you see here, 20,000 euros, also appears ultimately on our expenses. It doesn't appear as an expense on our budget. What happens is it's simply a reduction from the income we receive on investments from the Board of Foreign Parishes. So it basically just means less income that we receive. That's how we're paying that back. We budget for donations, unrestricted gifts, and grants. 10,000 euros, excuse me, is a reasonable but conservative figure. We did better than that in the past year, as you know. We more than doubled that in terms of the gifts that we received. But it's right for us always to be thinking in terms of encouraging charitable donation to the convocation. I'm very focused on that as a bishop. And so the last piece of this puzzle that you see is a transfer from reserve. We live under a rule that was passed in a resolution at a convention of ours held in Frankfurt some years ago, that we must bring to you as a convention a balanced budget. Well, the way this budget gets balanced, because we have that tension between returning to normal operations, but not yet having a clear picture about income, is that we draw down on some of that surplus we had last year of 165,000 euros to pay the difference between anticipated revenue and anticipated expenses for the year to come. So that's what that transfer from reserve represents. Obviously, if we receive more in income from investments than we plan on here, if we receive more in donations and grants than we plan on here, that number goes down and that part of the wage shrinks. So now let's look at a much more colorful Camembert chart, which is the picture for likely expenses. And again, I'm going to start at 12 o'clock and go around. So the governance of the convocation is basically what we're doing here. It's the part of our lives that is about convention. It's about our canonical responsibilities to be part of the governance of the Episcopal Church. And a major reason for the increase in this part of the puzzle this coming year is, as we've mentioned, general convention expenditures. That will be 30,000 euros of this number, and it may need to be a little bit more, as I've mentioned. Then we get to external relationships and communications. This is contributions we make to the Anglican Center in Rome, to the Francophone network of the Anglican Communion. In the past, it has been some dues that we pay that frankly, we're cutting right now because we just think in terms of our other priorities, we need to focus elsewhere. So that budget is a little bit down. The next section here at around 2 to 3 o'clock are the commissions and ministry initiatives of the convocation. Largely, these are unchanged with one exception, and that's children and youth. And there's a significant increase here. It's 7% of our whole budget. And the reason for this is, as I mentioned, we were called on by the last convention to create a position called Coordinator for Ministry with Children and Youth, and to fund it at 10,000 euros a year. We did that. We put out a posting for this position. The commission worked on that posting together with me. We advertised, we had candidates, we interviewed candidates, and then the task force that was doing the interviewing came to me to say, we don't have one good candidate for this. We have two fabulous candidates for this. And as our bishop, you need to find the resources to bring them both. And so I have, and that is why this number is larger, but I believe it is the right investment for us to make. I've made that case to the Finance Committee and the Council of Advice, and that is now going to be laid before you as our proposal. But we have both Gregory Stark and our own Katie Osweiler, who are taking on this role to sort of rebuild our program for children and youth, because it has essentially been frozen in amber for 2 years. You'll see also some very modest investments here in the ministry initiatives that we started 2 years ago: climate and creation care, migrant and refugees ministry, and racism reconciliation, and beloved community. And if I may, parenthetical insertion here, as a preview of coming attractions, next Saturday at the same time, we plan to do another town hall at which the Racism, Reconciliation, and Beloved Community Group are going to present the summary findings of the survey that they did over the last year. One of the ways that we lived into our call to do some serious listening across the convocation in the past year. Okay, moving swiftly on. Support of congregations remains strong. We continue to have our grant program here, and partly we're able to fund some of this through a grant that we received from the Episcopal Church called Virtual to Vital, which is helping us to build new missions across the convocation. I see that there's been a question posed about that, and I'll come to that when we get to questions. Support of clergy remains about the same. And then we get to the section of the pie that is the total administration budget of the convocation. This seems a sort of large piece of our puzzle, but it encompasses a lot of things. It's running the office in Paris, paying our contribution to defray expenses to the cathedral for the space that we occupy, the electricity that we use, the systems that we take advantage of, and all of that. It's my travel. The convocation provides support for my travel when I travel, and for if I take the priest in charge and that person's partner out to dinner, that you all pay for that. So that's what that bishop number looks like. That is a bit of a cut from this year and from the year before, because I think we can use those resources elsewhere. The archdeacon and our canon for administration are built into this. The slice for digital ministry increases by 25% over the current year. And the simple reason for that is I think we've learned over these last 18 months or so how vital digital ministry is to our life together as a convocation. The ways in which it's kept us connected and deepened our connections with each other across Europe in new ways is something I think we must continue to invest in. The church that we're moving into is one that is hybrid, and we're just not going back to the church of before. And so I think we need to continue to invest in this. And I should maybe return down to the 5 o'clock area and say one of the numbers in that support of congregations number is a continuing program for digital ministry grants to our congregations to enable all of us to build even further our abilities to do hybrid ministry. We're going to continue to make those investments in the years ahead. We don't think that that was a sort of one and done problem. All of us are going to have to continue to do digital ministry and do it well. And I think the convocation should help our congregations to do that work. So this is the proposed picture for 2022. It's also in the packet that you were sent. It's in there. It's a list of numbers and not a pretty picture. Not that I claim this is too much of a work of art, but that's the thinking that's gone behind it. And with that, we can turn to questions. Malia, I'm going to maybe call on you to be the MC of questions here.
Hello there. I would love to do this. I'm actually going to ask if we may. I've got some polls ready to test our Whova.
Oh, excuse me. Yes.
So I'm actually going to ask all of our registered delegates who are with us. You should see coming up in your Whova app a poll, and that's found on the right side of your screen that says, are you ready to move on to questions, yes or no? If you are a registered clergy person, I'm opening up a poll for you to answer, yes, I'm ready to move on to asking questions, or no, I would like more presentation time. And if you are a guest or an officer, I'm opening up a poll for you. And this is all of our polls are being held through Whova. So again, on the side of that session broadcast, you'll see questions and answers. We already have a few. Then you'll see polls, chat, and community. So I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to see where that is so that everyone can answer together. Okay. While we are taking the result of the poll.
Can't find it, Malaya.
Okay, so if you will, I will share my screen really quickly and just direct everyone to where you can find it. My screen's going to look a little different because I am an admin. Yeah. But you'll see we had a poll that's my favorite part of today was, that'll be once we're complete, but there should be a published poll here. And I'm not sure if you're not seeing it. And
I'm on my phone and I see nothing like that, only your face. I don't know if there's anybody else who can advise.
I also see nothing in those tabs. Yeah.
Nothing there.
Yeah, I'm on my iPad. I don't see anything.
Okay.
Mine says no polls have been asked.
Interesting. Okay, so we're going to work on that this week. And, in the meantime, I will say thank you to everyone who is finding the chat both in Whova and also the Q&A feature. So I'm going to share, Sylvia had asked a question of Denis. The question was the approximate book value of the second trust fund. So Denis, I'm going to unmute you, and if you'll speak to that.
What was the question again?
The question was the approximate book value of the second trust fund that will
The
be
book,
off.
it's about 327,000 euros.
Okay.
Thank you. And do you anticipate offsets? Being able to offset that in any way?
Well, in part with the surplus we anticipate in 2021, which could be in the same region as the one we experienced in 2020. Of course, I have to be very prudent because the year is far from finished, but this will leave us with not an operating loss, but the loss in value of our assets, of course.
Capital loss. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Malaya.
Yes, Carol.
I've just gone back to the largest, well, not the full screen, but the general screen. And I've gone into polls and it says no polls have been asked.
Okay, we're gonna work on that this week. We're gonna forget the polls for right now.
Okay.
We're gonna keep going with our questions. Debbie Groby has asked, please tell more about the two grants, the Seed for Virtual to Vital and the Evangelism Virtual Missions.
Yep, thanks. So these are two different grants that the Convocation has written for and received. The Seed grant is from the United Thank Offering folks, and it was what gave us the ability to do some exploration about building virtual missions, because we realized that one of the things that happened to us during COVID was that the historic link between ministry and geography had been kind of broken down. We could go to any church in the Convocation that we wanted to visit on Sunday morning if we just knew where to find them virtually. Or you could, listen to sermons from any place in the world. So we thought, well, we could start organizing missions that were not geographically focused, but rather focused on different interest groups or different language groups, and that seed grant was for those purposes. The next one, the sort of Virtual to Vital, is a $30,000 grant, which translates into fewer euros, obviously, to help us move some of these forward into being sort of new mission entities in the Convocation. One of them will be proposed as a new Convocation mission that we hope you will approve at the convention. It's a Francophone mission, a gathering of people who worship in French that is based at the cathedral, but is a mission of the Convocation. There are new missions in Germany that we're hoping to support with these funds as well. And there's some hope that we have about the Latin American community in Rome, about sort of helping them a little bit more with the funding that they have. So the council has looked at this grant and has received a recommendation from me about how it should be distributed, and that's sort of how we're unfolding it. I want to say also about the polls. I just think if you're in Hoover, you need to be in this event in order to see polls that have been posted for the event. You can't just be logged into Hoover. You need to actually clock into the event that we're a part of here. And then the budget question and answer session, and then you may have a different outcome about the polls. Just think maybe.
Okay, so
I think there might be some
let's see.
questions
We
in the
have
chat too.
I have another question here from Leah Rios. On page 44, I saw and support this significant increase to the support through digital enhancement grants. Could you speak to the difference in the numbers between 2020, 2021, and 2022, what you see happening with that program?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit about this in my remarks, but this has to do with our sense as bishop and council that all of our congregations continue to face the need of putting their things out into a virtual world, whether it's worship, fellowship, formation, youth connections, all of these things. That takes skill. It also takes equipment. It takes bandwidth. It takes a lot of things, and sometimes those things require money. We can't pay for all of it, but we want to help congregations build that dimension of their ministry, and we want to encourage it to get built. So that's the best thing to do with a grants program. Mm-hmm. And I see a question here from Debbie regarding our accounts in the large wage for investment income. We do show that, Debbie, to the French authorities. That income does appear to the auditors. The difference that we're talking about here is who owns the investment. If we own it, then we pay taxes on the income because we are a French entity. And as far as the French authorities are concerned, that's taxable in France. But if the Board of Foreign Parishes owns it, then the increase in value of that investment is an increase in value generated in the United States, and it's not in the reach of the French tax authorities. That's the difference. So that, I hope that answered the question.
Denny has a question too.
I hope it's an answer as well. To make it short, income from investment is taxable. What we will receive from the Board of Foreign Parishes is grants.
There's a grant. That's right. Thank
And
you,
grants
Denny.
are not
That's right.
taxable. And actually, we show, of course, our accounts to the auditors, but the buck stops there. We don't have to show it to the prefecture, to state authorities, unless the tax people come in for an inspection. But I don't anticipate that.
Other questions? Other comments? No, I think not. No. All right.
I'm not seeing any hands raised in Zoom. And here on the on Whova, if you would like to join the session itself, you probably are already in it, but you can go to Agenda, to Sessions, and then select the Budget Question and Answer session. And that's how you're in the session. There I see, I think the only question that we have left in Whova at the moment for question and answer is one that does not pertain exactly to the budget.
This is the Lutz Ackermann question.
Yes, so I think
Yes.
I think what's important for us to say is I want to make sure that anyone who has a budget or financial question is able to ask that before we end our live stream, which will be available for people to watch after this event has concluded. That way, if someone who's a delegate has missed this meeting,